I need to make some clarification on what we've learned now for 3 weeks concerning Mordecai. We need to have an understanding so that we know here is what the Bible teaches, here is what the Word of God says, and this is why he did what he did. Learning to be faithful and approved of God demands clarification on some peculiar actions in line with God's commandments. We need to have some clarification on Mordecai's firm stand as revealed in the scriptures. Not what commentaries say, not what we have heard other people say. We ourselves should have understanding. You understand? The stand of Mordecai was actually built on 3 areas of action. We're coming to Esther chapter 3 verses 2, 3 and 4. Esther chapter 3 verse 2. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed, underline that word, and reverenced, underline that word, Haman. For the king had so commanded concerning him, but Mordecai bowed not, underline that, nor did him reverence, underline that. Then the king's servants which were in the king's gate said unto Mordecai, why transgressest thou the king's commandment? Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, he hearkened not unto them that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matter would stand. For he had told them that he was a Jew. Underline that. Why don't you bow? Why don't you do reverence to this man? I am a Jew. Look at chapter 3, chapter 5, verse 9. In chapter 5, verse 9, then Haman went forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up. That's the third point, that he stood not up, nor moved for him. He was full of indignation against Mordecai. The question is, since he said, I am a Jew, was it forbidden by God that a Jew will not bow to anyone, will not do reverence to anyone, will not stand up for anyone? Not really, not really. Was it idolatry, worshiping idol, to bow down to a person, or to do reverence to a person, or to stand up when an elderly person comes in? Not really. And so we're going to look at the pattern of the Jews, the commandments for the Jews, and the practice between the Jews. We need this clarification because what I've been hearing from teachers and those who answer questions is that because of Exodus chapter 20, that will not bow down to an idol. That's why Mordecai took his stand. He wasn't going to bow to Haman. Not really, not really. Number one, Jews bowed before their superior. Jews bowed before their superior. We're looking at 1 Samuel chapter 24. 1 Samuel chapter 24, I'm reading here from verse 8. In 1 Samuel chapter 24 verse 8, David also arose afterward and went out of the cave and cried after Saul, saying, my Lord the king. And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed himself. If it was wrong, if it was worshiping somebody, David should not have bowed to Saul. You know the story, and you know the situation between them. Bowing to a person in the Jewish practice was not idolatry. In 2 Samuel chapter 24, 2 Samuel chapter 24, I'm reading from verse 19. And David, according to the saying of God, went up as the Lord commanded. And Araunah looked and saw the king and his servants coming on toward him. And Araunah went out and, tell me, bowed himself before the king on his face to the ground. We're looking at 1 Kings chapter 1. 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 23. In 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 23, it tells us, and he told the king, saying, behold, Nathan. Who is Nathan? Tell me out loud. The prophet. Behold, Nathan the prophet. And when he was come in before the king, what did he do? He bowed himself before the king with his face to the ground. Chapter 2. I'm reading from verse 19. Chapter 2, verse 19. Bathsheba therefore went unto King Solomon. That's the mother going to the son Solomon to speak unto him for Adonijah. And the king rose up to meet her. And what did he do to the mother? Bowed himself unto her and sat down on his throne. The throne was there. He was sitting on the throne. The mother came in. He stood up and he bowed to the mother. And then he says he caused his seat to be set for the king's mother, and she sat on the right hand. So number one, it wasn't wrong for a Jewish person to bow to a superior. So you cannot say, I'm following Mordecai. You don't understand Mordecai. He said, I am a Jew, and so I'm a Christian, and I never bow to anyone because that is worshiping idol. No, not really. Number two, he did no reverence to Haman. And even though the threat was there, that Haman got angry, I'm going to destroy this man, and I'm going to destroy all the Jews, Mordecai was still firm in his stand. Why was he firm? Somebody said, because if you do reverence to anyone, you are worshiping that person like God. And if Haman made himself God, we have to resist him. And if anybody makes himself God, how do we know they make themselves God? We must not reverence. The Jews actually reverenced their seniors. Look at 2 Samuel chapter 9. 2 Samuel chapter 9. I'm reading from verse 6. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, was come unto David, he fell on his face and what? I can't hear you. You don't want to learn the word of God, you're looking at time. Tell me, did reverence? And David said, Mephibosheth. And he answered, behold thy servant. Mephibosheth looked at David as a senior, as king. And he was just a little fellow. And so he did reverence. We're coming to 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 31. Rightly dividing the word of truth. 1 Kings chapter 1, I read from verse 31. Then Bathsheba. Who was Bathsheba? The wife of who? Tell me. Wife of David the king. But look at verse 31. Then Bathsheba bowed with her face to the earth and did, what did she do? Reverence to the king. And the king and said, let my Lord King David live forever. The wife did reverence to David. Is that idolatry? No, not at all. It's the normal thing with the Jewish people when they saw the elderly. Now let's come to Hebrews chapter 12. I'm reading from verse 9. Hebrews chapter 12. We're reading from verse 9. In verse 9 it says, furthermore, we've had fathers of our flesh, our biological fathers, which corrected us, and we gave them, tell me, reverence. It's the normal thing. We reverence our parents. We reverence the seniors, the elders. And then it goes on to say, and we give them reverence. Shall we not much rather be in subjection unto the Father of spirits and live? Let's come to Ephesians chapter 5, verse 33. Ephesians chapter 5. And we're reading from verse 33. It says in verse 33, nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself. And read the rest of that verse aloud. You read that again, 1, 2, 3, go. Read that for the final time, 1, 2, 3, go. And the wife see that she reverence her husband. Not idolatry, not at all. To bow before an elder, to reverence, respect, honor before an elder, not idolatry. Now the third thing is that, do the Jews stand up before the elderly? Because Mordecai stood not up. And what's the reason for not standing up before Haman? I am a Jew. We're coming to Leviticus chapter 19. Standing up when an elderly person comes in. It tells us in Leviticus chapter 19, reading from verse 32, thou shalt rise up before the hoary head and honor the face of the old man, and fear thy God, I am the Lord. It was actually commanded that when an elderly aged person comes to the room, that the younger ones, the rest of the people, will rise up before that person. We're looking at 1 Kings chapter 1. 1 Kings chapter 1. I'm reading from verse 19. 1 Kings chapter 1. And we're reading from verse 19. In chapter 2, reading from verse 19. Here is what it says in verse 19. Bathsheba therefore went unto King Solomon to speak unto him for Adonijah. And the king rose up to meet her. He didn't say, I'm sitting on the throne and I'm the number one in Israel. And because of my position, here the mother comes in, and the king rose up to meet her and bowed himself unto her. And then he sat down on the throne after showing that respect to the mother, and caused his seat to be set for the king's mother, and she sat on the right hand. We're looking at Job chapter 29. Job chapter 29. I read here from verse 8. Job 29 verse 8. The young men saw me and hid themselves. The aged arose and stood up. Job said, they recognize my place, my position, my honor. And when I came in, they stood up. Let's come back now to Esther. Esther chapter 8. And we're reading from verses 3 and 4. Esther chapter 8. Reading from verse 3. And Esther spake yet again before the king. And what did she do? Tell me. Fell down at his feet and besought him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite, and his device that he had devised against the Jews. And then the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So Esther did what? And did what again? Stood before the king. That's Esther, trained and brought up by Mordecai. And she stood up even before the king. How then do we understand why Mordecai said, I am a Jew, and I will not bow, I will not do reverence, neither will I stand up when Haman comes in. Mordecai understood that the Amalekites, and Mordecai was an Amalekite, an Agagite was also an Amalekite, that they were supposed to have been exterminated. And God had given the order that there will be war with the Amalekites from generation to generation. And that God does not regard any Amalekite. And Haman happens to be an Amalekite. It was for that reason he said, I am a Jew. The Jews don't recognize Amalekites. In the sight of God, they don't even exist. They are non-entities. Look at Exodus chapter 17, and we're reading from verse 8. Exodus chapter 17, I'm reading from verse 8. Then came Amalek and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Look at verse 14. And the Lord said unto Moses, write this for a memorial in a book, and rehearse it in the ears of Joshua. For I will, tell me, utterly put out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. That was the reason why Mordecai, knowing that Amalekites, Agagites don't have any remembrance in the sight of God, that's why he said, it's a dead man. It's an unacceptable man. It's a man that he has the hatred himself, but apart from that, there's no remembrance of them. Look at verse 16. For he said, because the Lord had sworn that the Lord will have war with Amalek, tell me, from generation to generation, all generations, and Mordecai was in his own generation, and God has war with the Amalekites. I won't bow to him, I won't do him reference. God is fighting him. Deuteronomy chapter 25. In Deuteronomy chapter 25, verse 17. Deuteronomy chapter 25, 17. Remember what Amalek did unto thee by the way, when ye were come forth out of Egypt, how he met thee by the way, and smote the hind part of thee, even all that were feeble behind thee, when thou wast faint and weary. And he feared not God. Amalekites feared not God. Therefore it shall be, when the Lord thy God has given thee rest from all thine enemies round about in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance to possess it, that thou shalt, tell me, blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven, thou shalt not forget it. In all your generations, all Amalekites and Agagites or Amalekites, you will not forget this. You won't respect them. You won't honor them. You won't help them. You won't lift them up. You won't exalt them. In the mind of God, all those Amalekites in all their generations, they're destroyed already. That's why Mordecai said, I won't bow, not because it's wrong for a Jew to bow to a senior person. I won't do him reference, not because it's wrong or idolatrous to bow to somebody who is elderly. And he said, I will not stand up, because here is what God had said. We must not forget. That's the reason he did what he did. But generally, you see an elderly person and you bow, you respect your husband, you reverence your husband. Somebody comes in and he is higher than you are, maybe in your office or somewhere. You don't, relax and then put your chair in a relaxing, situation or position and say, I am Mordecai. You are not Mordecai. You stand up and respect the people that come in. Do you understand? That clarification was necessary. Now, that's part of rightly dividing the word